On March 3rd, 1944, a coal-powered freight train was approaching the entrance of the military tunnel near the town of Balvano, Italy. Officially, there were fewer than a dozen people on board, all of them members of the crew. But when the train emerged from the tunnel, the lead locomotives would have been responsible for more than 500 deaths, the worst disaster ever to take place on a railway in all recorded history. In 1944, Italy was a country in total upheaval. It had entered the Second World War under the leadership of Benito Mussolini, allied with Nazi Germany. But after a disastrous military campaign in North Africa, the country was being invaded by Allied forces. In 1943, Italy signed an armistice with the Allies, but was subsequently bombed by Germany. German forces rescued Mussolini and placed him in charge of a puppet state in northern Italy called the Italian Social Republic, which was fighting against the Kingdom of Italy in the south for control of the country. In short, in 1944, Italy was the scene of a civil war within a world war. Across Europe, resources were scarce. Supplies and materials were diverted to the war effort, often to the detriment of civilians. In Italy, troops and military equipment were given priority over civilian passengers on public transportation. This left huge numbers of people unable to secure seats on passenger trains. With no other alternative, it became very common for people to secretly board freight trains in order to get where they needed to go. Supplies were scarce. Even food produced on farms was almost always sent to the front, and only a minimal portion reached cities like Naples so that people could survive. To compensate for this, city residents travelled to the countryside with goods they could obtain from Allied troops, such as coffee or cigarettes, and exchanged them for dairy products and meat to feed their families. With so few train tickets available, boarding freight trains became the most common way for city dwellers to travel to farms to carry out these essential exchanges. Some routes that were heavily used for this even began to be known as black market express routes. All of this, boarding freight trains and engaging in black market trade, was technically illegal, but the authorities did not intervene. The practice filled a massive gap. Allowing it to continue helped maintain peace in the cities and prevented ordinary people from starving to death. Another resource in short supply was coal. Many trains in Italy at the time were coal-powered, with only a few lines fully electrified. This meant that on some routes, electric locomotives had to be replaced halfway by steam locomotives. Because coal was so scarce, engineers burned whatever kind of coal they could get, even low-quality coal that produced less power and emitted large amounts of carbon monoxide, an odourless and poisonous gas. In February 1944, a train travelling from a US military base passed through a tunnel on the Barragiano-Tito route. While inside the tunnel, the engineer was overcome by the gases produced by the coal and lost consciousness. He fell between the locomotive and the tender and died as a result. It was considered a tragic death and nothing more. No measures were taken to prevent something like this from happening again. The Naples to Potenza line was one of those known as a black market express. That line carried people from Naples into the countryside, crossing the Apennine Mountains. The section leaving Naples was electrified, but when trains reached the city of Battipaglia, they switched to a steam locomotive. The non-electrified stretch continued climbing into the mountains, with very steep grades that required enormous power. On March 2nd, 1944, 45 freight cars departed Naples. This was train 8017. In addition to the official cargo, there were nearly 500 extra passengers on board. Many were heading to rural farms to complete black market exchanges. At 7 p.m, the train arrived in Battipaglia, where a steam locomotive was coupled to the front of the train. During that stop, an unknown number of additional passengers boarded. By the time it departed, there may have been as many as 700 unofficial passengers on board. Near midnight, the train arrived at the Balvano Ricciano station, where it stopped briefly for maintenance before beginning the climb toward the military tunnel about 50 minutes later. It was moving slowly. The train reached a maximum speed of about 15 kilometers per hour, 9.3 miles per hour, as it advanced through thick fog toward the tunnel entrance. Normally, the staff at the Bellamuro station, on the other side of the tunnel, would send a signal back to Balvano once the train had passed completely through the tunnel without issue. But that night, no signal was sent. It is not known for certain why the train stopped in the middle of the military tunnel, which is winding and measures about 1.8 kilometres, 1.1 miles through the mountain. Most likely, the excessive weight combined with the poor quality fuel made it extremely difficult for the train to handle the curves and the 1.3% grade. In addition, the rails were probably damp, causing the wheels to slip despite the sandboxes being activated in an attempt to prevent this. Whatever the case, around 2 a.m, the train came to a stop with all but the last 2 cars inside the tunnel. Not long before, another train had passed through the same tunnel, so the air inside was already heavy with smoke. Ventilation was extremely poor, and as the engineers tried to restart train 8017, more and more carbon monoxide accumulated in the air. The engineers at the front had no way to communicate with those at the rear, so when the front crew attempted to reverse downhill to exit the tunnel, the crew at the back believed the movement meant the train was slipping backward and applied the brakes suddenly. At that hour of the night, many unofficial passengers were asleep. Even those who were awake had no idea of the danger. Carbon monoxide has no smell and no colour. By the time passengers began to realise that something was wrong, many people had already lost consciousness. The engineers at the front were the first to lose consciousness. Several passengers managed to get off the train and attempted to escape by running along the tracks, but most were overcome by carbon monoxide and collapsed beside the rails before reaching clean air. Eventually, one of the brakemen at the rear of the train, a man named Michel Polo, realised that there was a serious problem. He got off and ran on foot back to the Balvano Ricciano station to seek help. It was around 5:10 a.m. when he arrived, too late for most of the passengers of the 8017. Many had already died in their seats, in most cases without realising anything was happening. A train was sent to pull the 8017 out of the tunnel, but it could not get close enough because the tracks were covered with bodies. It took nearly 3 hours to remove them and then clear the train from the gas-filled tunnel. The official death toll was 517, but there are indications that there may have been as many as 626 bodies. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, the bodies were laid out at the Balvano Ricciano station before being transferred to the Balvano cemetery, where they were hastily buried in mass graves. Only 235 of the deceased were positively identified, and only the train crew received formal burials. Due to the heavy censorship imposed by the war, the disaster was not reported. The Allies were concerned it would affect civilian morale, while Italian authorities wanted to distance themselves from such a deadly tragedy. It was not until 1951 that a parliamentary commission investigated the accident, though by then little evidence remained. No one was prosecuted for the disaster, which remains one of the deadliest in railway history. The disaster was attributed to poor quality coal. In the midst of a devastating war, no one in particular was held responsible for the quality of the coal. The intense censorship at the time of the disaster, combined with the fact that most of the victims were very poor, meant there was little public protest. Those who lost loved ones had no choice but to remain focused on their own struggle to survive. Officially, those who died were classified as war casualties. In a way they were, though they did not die from bombings or combat, but as a result of the chaos and the breakdown of normal life that so often occurs when the citizens of a country at war are simply fighting to stay alive.